Well, hello, welcome everyone, friends. So here with Nick Grossetti, and here today to talk to us about cheese. He's the cheese expert with Whole Foods, and as we just discussed, he's coming back in the spring to talk to us about olive oil, and olives, and chocolate, and maybe some other culinary items we will come up with. So, welcome, Nick.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here. This is really fun and exciting for me. I believe it or not, don't get to talk enough about cheese every day, with all that I know and love about it. So I'm really happy to be here and glad you're all here with me. Um, yeah, let's get into it. Let's talk about cheese. Um, Before that, just a little bit about me. I've been with Whole Foods since 2001. I'm originally from Northern California, which is where I started at Whole Foods. Moved to Kansas City in 2018 to help open the store here in Brookside. That's where I work right now. Um, in the middle of all that, I became a certified cheese professional, which is a designation sponsored by the American Cheese Society. It involves a rigorous course of study, a requirement of a certain amount of hours of industry work, and then a big test at their annual conference every year. And those who pass get to call themselves certified cheese professionals and do things like this and kind of be emissaries for cheese out in the world. So I'm really
and
proud of that.
and make their living playing with food.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I don't get tired of hearing you cut the cheese jokes, believe it or not. It's just the way it worked out for me. And then actually in 2019, the American Cheese Society decided to come up with a second level of certification that they called the Certified Cheese Sensory Evaluator, which that was a little more of a practical exam wherein we were given a bunch of cheeses that we had to figure out what they were and sort of describe their sensory characteristics and defects and things like that. Um, sort
Something
of
like wine sommelier.
something like that. Yeah, it's not quite as rigorous as the like master som program, um, but it's geared towards like judging cheese competitions, and being that sort of next elevated level of cheesemonger, to be able to kind of take care of cheese once it leaves the cheesemaker's hand. So yeah, so that's a little bit about me and what I do and where I come from, and yeah. So yeah, talking about cheese, what is it really? One of the things that always amazes me to this day is many cheeses as we have at Whole Foods and are exist in the world, they all come down to being the same ingredients. Um, and milk being the primary ingredient in all cheese. We're all pretty familiar what that is. Salt as a necessary preservative for keeping the milk, once it becomes cheese, fresh and viable. Bacteria and cultures are sort of the next part of it, and it's kind of what takes milk to that next level of flavor. Most of what tastes good about cheese, if it's not the salt or the milk fat, it's as a result of the bacteria and cultures that are introduced to the milk to make it cheese. And then there's something called an enzymatic coagulant, or rennet, which is what turns the liquid milk into the solid cheese. This picture here is the fourth stomach of ruminant animal. This is a calf's stomach for reference. And that's where enzyme or an element called rennet traditionally comes from. This is what takes, there's a enzyme within the walls of the stomach that kind of curdles the milk in a way that separates the solids, the fats, the proteins from the liquids, mostly water, but other trace liquids and minerals, giving you cheese as opposed to yogurt or curds and whey or something else. So rennet comes up a lot with people not understanding what it is or where it comes from, but in general, it's necessary in all cheese. But we'll talk about it a little later. It doesn't have to come from this slightly disturbing image. Another thing that cheese is nutrition. There's a lot of concentrated nutrition in a small amount of cheese, considering the protein, the healthy fat, calcium, there's vitamins, all in a small portable amount of substance that, when you compare it to milk, is hugely beneficial to humans and much easier to sustain than lugging around gallons and gallons of milk. It's also a sustainable farm to market product. Humans have been making cheese for about 4,000 years, maybe slightly more, depending on some of the more recent research. And it's been able to grow into a massive, massive industry that at its core is very sustainable. You can't, I don't know if anybody remembers, there was a marketing campaign about California cheese, that happy cows come from California and the best cheese comes from happy cows. I mean, that's really true. You get a much better product and higher yield, and when what you're dealing with, when you're using sustainable practices in your agricultural product. So the idea that cheese is a huge industry can be kind of like off-putting or scary, but really, talking to dairy farmers and people in the industry, it's something that sustains a way of life that is quickly like fading away. So yeah, cheese is great, and it's also delicious. So about that first ingredient, there are all different types of milks available to us when it comes to cheese making in particular. What differentiates a lot of the milk types comes down to these four elements. All milk consists of some portion of fat, protein, sugar or lactose, and mostly water. There are other small trace minerals and elements in there, but this is the big four components. So if you're talking about making cheese, what you're really talking about is isolating and concentrating the fat and the protein content. So in order to get more cheese from your milk, the higher the fat and protein, the more you're going to get out of each individual gallon. So this chart kind of illustrates that, you know, compared to a cow, a sheep's milk has a much higher content of fat and protein, which results in a much higher yield of cheese to gallon of milk. So there's an old saying in the dairy industry, or cheese making industry at least, that says cow's milk is for butter, goat's milk is for drinking, and sheep's milk is for cheese. And this directly relates to those fat and protein content. Butter, as we all enjoy it, is really like a cow's milk product. It comes sheep milk butter and goat milk butter, while they exist, they don't have quite the same richness, and that comes down to like the molecular size of the fat in each of the different types of animal. But sheep's milk having such a high protein content really yields an outstanding amount and quality of cheese. Goat's milk, as this phrase describes, for drinking, tends to be the easiest to digest. And again, that has to do with the like molecular size of the milk components. So anybody out there who maybe has trouble with cow's milk cheeses, oftentimes goat's milk can be substituted with great result. That doesn't take into account like dairy allergies or anything like that, but in general, where cow's milk might fail you, goat's milk might be the answer. So just saying, putting it out there. So back to rennet. Traditionally, that comes from that picture, the stomach lining of the fourth stomach of a juvenile ruminant. And if you think about a baby calf that, you know, for the first however many months of its life is surviving on milk, liquid, at some point it benefits it to turn into a solid and be able to kind of process through its digestive system that way. So there's this idea that cheese, the discovery of cheese came about when a wandering shepherd was carrying his daily ration of milk for his liquid consumption in one of these stomachs that might have made for a convenient canteen. And during the day, as the milk warmed up and sloshed around against this rennet, it solidified, it separated into curds and whey. And when he got into it, he was thrilled to discover that, you know, he had this portable, solid snack along with a healthy protein drink to go with it. That's probably pretty unlikely, actually, that's actually the way it went. There's some evidence to suggest that, I mean, people weren't drinking milk thousands and thousands of years ago in any kind of way that would make them want to carry it around with them all the time. And that lactose intolerance was a much more prevalent condition then. So to think that somebody would just be carrying around milk is probably pretty unlikely. Whereas the use of milk in recipes and sort of cooking it down into more like a yogurt consistency, or just simple like draining of the milk to remove the moisture and consuming that way, there's far more evidence to suggest that what we know of as cheese came from that than this idea of the wandering shepherd. So within this stomach, the rennet, chymosin is the name of this main coagulating enzyme, and this is again what turns liquid into solid. And it doesn't have to come from an animal source. Some people will be concerned or looking for vegetarian cheese. So this would be something still made from milk, but not using this animal byproduct of rennet. So chymosin can be distilled from certain fungi and molds, fermented soy. There's a long-standing tradition of using a nettle extract, especially in like Portuguese cheese making, that yields the same results and is totally vegetable based. And then, you know, rennet can be, or chymosin can be synthesized just in a lab. I mean, it's been isolated from the stomach lining by science and can just be duplicated and grown on its own. So there's no reason, there's not really like rennet farms. People get this idea that people are just like harvesting calves for their stuff. That's not really the way it works. And rennet, by and large, globally is used in cheese making as tradition would dictate. So if there's some cheese that's using rennet, it's probably because they've been using it for thousands of years, and that's the way they've always made it. But again, they're sourcing that rennet through some sustainable, much more viable means than chopping up dried calf stomach and powdering it and adding it to their milk. It's just not sustainable at any kind of industrial scale to do it that way. So if you are on the lookout for vegetarian cheese or sort of weary of rennet, look for enzymes on the label, or it will sometimes even say non-animal rennet or microbial rennet. These are all, there's no really like regulation concerning the use of and labeling of rennet, but it is a topic in the industry and that consumers are aware of. So there is some language out there to kind of help you on that. And definitely ask. Anybody behind a cheese counter will know what rennet is and why you might be looking for it or not looking for it or whatever. So asking if you're concerned is always appropriate. Another thing cheese is money. I don't necessarily mean cheese is expensive, but I hear you. Like, I work at Whole Foods. It can be very pricey, but the United States alone produces somewhere in the neighborhood of 13 billion pounds of cheese. And to give that some context, that's more cheese than the next 4 countries combined. So we make a lot of cheese in the United States, and that somebody's buying all of that. I mean, it adds up. I mean, in the last, I think it was the Specialty Food Association, they hold 2 conferences a year, one in San Francisco, one in New York. And cheese, out of all like specialty food, this is fancy chocolates and olive oils and olives and crackers, and I mean, it's just a massive event. Cheese was somewhere in the neighborhood of like 5% of everything that was there. And this is $1 billion event that goes on every year. It's just staggering, the amount of the size and scope of the industry. I mean, this slide will tell you Wisconsin produces 3 billion pounds of cheese alone. Germany, the entire country of Germany, is about 1 billion pounds less. So the fact that that the United States is so good at it, and that we in turn eat so much of it. I mean, in 2020, the US per capita consumption was about 40 pounds of cheese per person a year. I definitely eat 40 pounds of cheese a year. I don't know about everybody else, but that's up from 11 pounds in 1970. So we're making more, we're buying more, and it's all like a thriving industry that in recent years survived. I mean, COVID was tough on everybody, right? And that's not to say dairy farmers and cheesemakers and retailers weren't affected by that, but it's something of a comfort food, cheese. So people didn't give up on cheese for sure, and there's a lot of people that thrive because of it. Cheese is also good for you. We talked about it kind of being nutrient dense, lots of protein and calcium. The great thing about the internet is you can type in cheese is good for you and come up with any number of ways that cheese is good for you. It can prevent cavities, heart disease, diabetes, any number of things that if you feel like cheese would be good for it, go ahead. It definitely is. Ultimately, cheese is dense in nutrients, and while it certainly does contain a fair amount of fat and salt, it tends to be anecdotally very satisfying. So while you definitely need to eat cheese in moderation, when it comes to pound for pound nutrient density, I at least, and people have often shared with me, they find that they're satisfied with a serving or two of cheese, and the fat and salt that yields with that is outweighed by the vitamins, the protein, the calcium they get from it, which they wouldn't otherwise. So, and you don't take my word for it, Parmigiano Reggiano is the only cheese that was sent to the International Space Station for its nutrient density. So, you know, not a protein bar, not a tofu loaf, Parmigiano Reggiano. So there are all different types of cheese, aren't there? Let's see, Charles de Gaulle famously said, lamented the fact that he had to govern a country with 246 varieties of cheese, and how daunting that was. I think that was probably a bit of an understatement, because not long after, a man named Patrick Rance decided to see how accurate that was. In 1982, he wrote the Great British Cheese Book, and a few years later, the French Cheese Book, and he was able to identify more than 700 distinct types of cheeses between the two. Jump ahead to just the American Cheese Society. Their last conference had more than 2,000 submissions for different types of cheese. And those were only produced in the Americas. There was a couple of Canadians and one from Colombia, I think. But these were domestically produced cheeses of every different variety and sort and type and style, and with things added to them, and there was more than 2,000 different ones submitted. So yes, there are lots of types of cheese, and it can be very daunting. There are over 200 different cheeses just at Whole Foods, just saying. So, you know, you're not wrong to be kind of overwhelmed. But the fun thing is, it's the only way you're going to learn is to start at one end and eat your way through. And you can break it down. Cheese can be sort of distilled into 3 very basic types. And within that, there's of course infinite variety. But when it comes to fresh cheeses, these are generally things that are unaged. They're typically used to generate income for a dairy or a cheese processing plant, because of their quick turnaround. They tend to be soft and spreadable. They have mild textures. If you think about mascarpone or ricotta, mozzarella, these are very popular cheeses, and there's a lot of them because of this idea that they don't require the time commitment and that it takes to make a aged cheddar or even a brie or something. So they can be turned around very quickly, and their mild flavor lends themselves to a lot of popularity in as an ingredient or like with other dishes. Within that, you get this kind of middle ground, soft ripened or mold ripened cheese, like a brie or a camembert, which typically begin to have some sort of rind on them, whereas the mascarpone, the ricotta, mozzarella, there's no rind to it. But brie and camembert have that kind of bloomy rind, is what it's referred to, that kind of moldy, puffy exterior. This allows for some time aging. Not typically it anywhere from between like 45 to 90 days. You see a pretty consistent line of quality and flavor profiles within this mold ripened bloomy rind category. Again, they're softer textures, but because the cheese sort of ripens from the outside in, you get a little more of a gooiness to it, as opposed to like a mascarpone that's definitely spreadable, but doesn't have that kind of that runny quality. And the flavors can be very complex and pungent. Within this category, with brie and camembert, you'd find Limburger. You'd find there's a cheese called Epoisse that famously comes in a little wooden container because it's so gooey and pungent that it can't be contained. It has to come shipped in its own little pot. So there's a lot to be had in terms of this subcategory of fresh. Beyond that, you get in the next category, which is frequently just called table cheese. Semi-soft, semi-hard, these are terms that are out there that don't really mean anything other than what their texture is. Is it hard? Is it soft? Is it somewhere in between? Yeah, exactly. They tend to be sliceable. Al dente was a term somebody gave to me once that, it's something you can sink your teeth into. So this would include things like cheddar, Gouda, Havarti, things that tend to, with this age, give a little more complexity. These are cheeses that, given the time that they're allowed to age, will also provide a profit margin for a cheesemaker that doesn't come from a fresh cheese. So the example given here is a Tillamook cheddar, which comes from Oregon, that is 10 years old. It's something we have at Whole Foods, and just staggering to me to think that, in 2012, these cheesemakers set out to make something that they knew they weren't going to have a buyer for a decade. I mean, I wasn't thinking that far ahead in 2012 for sure. And it's a fantastic cheese. I mean, the result of it is completely unique. Where there are lots of cheddars out there, there are not a lot of 10-year-old cheddars. And everything that you might like about a cheddar, be it a sharpness or a saltiness or the kind of bite that you get, is just concentrated and heightened in something that has given that much time and care to age. So, oops, went too far ahead. How do I go back? Sorry. Hang on. Always, there had to be a technical difficulty, didn't there? Well, we'll skip ahead. So this is talking about choosing cheese. You've made the decision to buy cheese, which is a good decision, take it from me. What are some of the things you should look for or look out for? First and foremost, like freshness is key. Things that are within their best by or sell by dates are the obvious answer or choice. If at all possible, getting things cut to order or cut to your needs is the best way to go. And being able to sample, to try things before you buy them is really important. I mean, like we talked about earlier, cheese is an investment. And just because something looked good or somebody else said it was good and you take it home and don't like it, well, then you got to figure out what to do with it. So by all means, anytime you can have a sample or something cut to order is going to be the best option for any cheese you're going to buy. The same can be said for whoever's selling you the cheese. If you have a question about something, if you want to know what is tasting good or in season, I mean, there definitely is a seasonality to cheese. It's very helpful to have a knowledgeable staff, like you might find at Whole Foods Market, just saying. And then looking for obvious defects. If you can see, looking at the cheese you've selected, if it's got, spotting or surface molds or cracks in the rind. There's an example there of something called light oxidation, where the original surface of the cheese is kind of, pleasing yellow, where the oxidized portion is kind of like a pale bleached yellow white, and comparing the two, it's clear and obvious that it doesn't look quite right. Oftentimes the flavor will just be stale. It will, there's a process going on that's kind of denaturing some of the volatile components in the cheese there that give off a lot of flavor. And when exposed to light too long, they just kind of die out. So looking for that sort of bleached, oxidized surface is something to watch out for. And then things that are too runny or too ripe, like that last picture there shows, where I'm sure that's a delicious cheese. It may not have ever intended to be eaten at that point. You may have a preference that says otherwise, but you should know that going in. If something is just super goopy and gloppy and I'm trying to think of other words, it may be past its prime. I mean, that does happen. Cheese is alive, and it does have sort of a life cycle, especially those small format things that are that kind of continue to ripen in their whole form before they're cut up. So something that gets asked often of me is, I bought a piece of cheese and it had a little mold on the surface. Is it okay to just cut that off and eat it? In most cases, it absolutely is. So these are all pictures of cheeses that I would cut off the mold and eat. There are some other questionable things that are going on here, but nothing about the mold that's very much on the surface of these like densely textured cheeses is at all dangerous or going to affect the flavor once it's removed. That texture is kind of important. If you look at, if you think about the cheddar there, or anything that has kind of a solid texture with no holes in it, the mold is not going to penetrate very deeply into the paste of the cheese. It's going to be right on the surface and be able to be cut away. Anything that has a lot of those holes, if you look at the blue cheese there, I mean, what's the difference between any of these and blue cheese? A lot of it has to do with that texture, and the holes kind of allow for the propagation of flavorful molds in blue cheese. None of these molds pictured here are particularly flavorful. They're not harmful, but they just don't really add a whole lot. So you could eat them. They just wouldn't be very tasty. So things that are dense and solidly textured are going to be absolutely fine to scrape off the mold and eat. Then there are things that may not be obvious defects, or may not be not obvious defects. Let me rephrase that. So these are all examples of things that I would expect anybody to kind of take pause and think twice about purchasing any cheese that look like this, when in fact these are all great examples of well-aged, properly cared for cheeses, believe it or not. So this first one on the left here, the sort of orange block, it's not actually mold on the surface there. It's something called calcium lactate, and it's a result of free-floating calcium. As the cheese breaks down, calcium kind of breaks off from the solids in the milk and kind of rises to the surface over extended aging periods. So oftentimes you'll find this in extra aged cheddars, sometimes in things like Gouda, Parmesan, flaky texture on the surface of the cheese. Frequently it's flavorless, but at this level it would have kind of a, sort of a salty, chalky flavor to it. Definitely a different texture than a cheese. It'll be kind of crunchy. But really it's an example of something that was well cared for and well aged. The cheese is supposed to do that. And the rest of the cheese will have an intensity of flavor that you kind of get. So it's almost think of it like a rind forming on the outside of this cheese that, given enough time, would be uniform and maybe a little more pleasing looking, but definitely looks a little suspicious on the surface of that cheese there. And the cheese next to it there is the same type of process, but on the inside of the cheese. So you frequently will find it like in Manchego cheese, oftentimes in Gouda and Parmesan, these like white specks and flecks inside the cheese. And that is definitely a sign of quality and proper aging over the course of time to yield something that is likely exceptional. These other two pictures come from soft ripened cheeses, and these are the surfaces of two different cheeses that have a bacteria called B. linen, and it produces this wrinkly, brain-like, just alien, strange surface that frequently will be kind of have these sort of bluish and black spots to them. This is something that's very difficult to achieve in cheese making and be able to like bring to market. So as foreign and strange as those cheeses may look, they really are an example of a cheesemaker doing something right. So that comes from knowledge and experience and asking somebody. It's not foreign to me or anybody I work with for somebody to ask, is it supposed to look like that? And 9 times out of 10 it is, believe it or not. So if you bought cheese, you've got it home, how do you keep it fresh? What do you do with it? The worst thing you could do is keep it wrapped in plastic. Unfortunately, plastic, while great for retailing and merchandising cheese, is the worst thing that you can wrap cheese in. Cheese is alive. It needs to breathe. It needs a certain amount of moisture loss and evaporation. And plastic just tends to seal it off, and that moisture will kind of collect on the surface. And this is where you get into the trouble of having things grow on the surface of your cheese that you may not want. So really anything is better than plastic. Wax paper is great. People will use aluminum foil. If you keep it in a Tupperware, that's fine. Really, my advice would be to get your cheese home, take it out of the plastic, throw that away, and put it in anything else. There are specially designed papers for wrapping cheeses. They're kind of wax papery, sort of almost feel like plastic lined, but they have like micro perforations in them. So they do allow for that moisture exchange. You can wrap something very tightly and it will still off gas or give off the moisture that it's trying to, and still stay fresh and not absorb things from your fridge. The other thing would be to keep it in the coldest part of the refrigerator. For whatever reason, the designers of refrigerators put the cheese part on the door, which is the worst place to put cheese. Actually, opening and closing it, you're exposing it to temperature fluctuations and just inviting things to land on the cheese. So keeping it in the vegetable compartment or the back corner of the fridge is definitely the best place to keep your cheese. And every time you take it out and eat some cheese, it's best to rewrap it with a fresh piece of wax paper or whatever you happen to use before putting it back, because yeah, there will inevitably be some amount of moisture or some bacterial growth on the paper, that putting it right back on the cheese is just inviting it to take root. So coldest part of the fridge, rewrapping every time you use it, and then just buying what you're going to use. Again, that idea of getting a custom cut of cheese is really important here. If you have cheese sitting too long in any refrigerator, it's going to go bad. So
I have a question.
yes.
So how about freezing it? If you buy cheese on sale, like at
Sure.
Christmas time, and then is it okay to, because it will stop all those biological processes in it?
Right. Yeah. So the subject of freezing cheese comes up a lot. I can't deny anybody for wanting to take advantage of a sale and stock up on something. It's generally frowned upon. What tends to happen when you freeze cheese, while you do sort of arrest any of those biological processes from happening, a lot of the moisture that's in the cheese kind of freezes out. And in doing so, it will kind of break down some of the texture and protein in the cheese as these ice crystals rise to the surface. And there's no real way of getting that moisture back into the cheese once you go to use it. So definitely for softer things, fresh things, I would not recommend freezing. Fresh mozzarella, ricotta, things like that, they're just going to be ruined. Harder texture things, Parmesan, aged Gouda, things like that, it's definitely not going to be the same thing. You're not going to get the same thing out that you put in, but it's still going to be usable. Especially if it's something you're grating or adding to a recipe, it's perfectly fine. But I would just caution to not expect like freezing cheese to completely preserve the freshness and quality that you put in. It's not going to go bad. It's not going to be wrong, but it's going to be different.
Okay. And I found on Amazon there is a cheese special paper for cheese for $15.
Yeah, we sell some at Whole Foods actually too.
Oh, really?
And honestly, we get so many samples and like freebies behind the cheese counter. If you need cheese paper, just come talk to us. We've got plenty.
Oh, thank you. I never heard of it. I see in French markets in Europe, the cheese is never wrapped in plastic. It's always in paper, and I kind of didn't put it together.
Yeah, I mean, standing in front of a big cheese case full of cut things all wrapped in plastic and showing off, it looks great, but I'd much rather have it all wrapped in tinfoil if that was what it came down to, So yeah, I mean, another question we get asked a lot is about like building a cheese board or pairings. And really, while this is probably, there's enough information here for a whole other class, I would want you to walk away with the idea that there's no wrong way to do it. There's no right way to do it. Anytime you're buying cheese for yourself and your friends, you're doing the right thing. My first advice would be to like go with what you like. I mean, if you wanted to put out, if you know you like cheddar and wanted to pick 3 different cheddars, that's great and really interesting. I mean, think about the American Cheese Society conference with 2,000 different kinds of cheese. I mean, they've got hundreds of different kinds of cheddars that are all different and people get excited about. So there's no right way to do it. There's no wrong way to do it. There's of course, like any number of artful ways to present these products and to create bites and tastes of things. But any way you're doing it is the right way.
And I have a question here. I think it fits this section. How about cheese eating etiquette? If you are supposed to eat the rind, which is my favorite,
right? Yeah.
And like what is like frowned upon, the wedge of the cheese. If you cut it, it's like a total faux pas, social faux pas. So if you can comment on it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So definitely, if you're somewhere where there is a cheese board presented to you to cut your own cheese, if it's a soft cheese like a brie or camembert, something with a rind to it and a soft paste, it would be a poor etiquette to just scoop out the middle, leaving the rind on the plate. It'd be more proper to just cut yourself a piece with the rind included and then eat what you want. You don't have to eat the rind, but rind is part of the cheese. I mean, there's no way of getting the end result without the rind. So it kind of comes with the total package. Same thing with the if there's a wedge of cheese, I'm trying to think of how to describe it. You should be cutting the entire length of the cheese. So rather than, if you've got a triangle, rather than cutting off this way, you want to be cutting this way. So take a whole wedge, like a tiny piece off of the cheese that mirrors the shape. The idea there is if you think about a wheel of cheese and a wedge, the point of the wedge is coming from the center of the wheel. In some cases, that center portion is unique in its flavor profiles when you compare it to the rest of the cheese. So the part that's closest to the rind tends to be a little more dry, whereas the piece that's closest to the center is a little more, a little softer, a little richer. So you would want to cut a piece that gives yourself and everybody else to come behind you that same experience of the whole piece, rather than just cutting off the pointy part and having that for yourself, and then everybody else just works their way towards the rind.
Exactly.
Good question. Good question. I do cringe a little bit when I see that skeleton of brie carved out on a
Well,
board.
the rind is my favorite.
Yeah, and it's great. Yeah, it is edible. Definitely, cheese rind is edible if it's not wax or cheese paper or, obviously inedible. It's there to be eaten. You may not like it. I don't like all cheese rind, but it is
For
there.
example, on the smoked mozzarella, they cut the heel off. I don't understand why. That's my favorite part. And
Yeah.
And the same baguette sandwiches, they always cut the heel off.
Sure. Yeah.
Which is like, what?
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, some people just they object wholeheartedly to the rind, and with something like smoked mozzarella, I mean, that's what you're buying. You're buying the smoke. There's more of it in the rind. I
Save
agree.
those for me. I will be there.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, all this to say, there's definitely ways of thinking to go about putting together a cheese board or pairing things. If you're going to compare flavors or contrast things, so maybe you've got things that are salty and sweet, or maybe you want just things that are all salty. That's great. Any of these things are going to be interesting, and you're going to learn from it. So if you start out, like I said, if you start out only having 3 Goudas on a tray, you've done great. You've done a good thing. Maybe next time, pick the one you like the least and throw a cheddar in there and see how it compares. There is another saying that if it grows together, it goes together. So thinking about this idea of regionality, classic pairing is fresh goat cheeses and Loire Valley white wines. And not only is it classic because that's a delicious pairing, but because in the Loire Valley, where they make wine, they also have a lot of goats and they make a lot of cheese. So that idea of the sort of tradition and regionality dictating what you put together is always a good bet. And something else that I heard once along the way when putting together a cheese board is you want to have something old, something new, something different, and something blue. So something old being something aged, something new being one of those fresh cheeses, something different, something you've never tried before, and a blue cheese. So just as an example, for 4 cheeses you can find anywhere. I mean, Trader Joe's, Whole Foods for sure, Hy-Vee, anybody's going to have a Gouda, a Camembert, a Manchego, and a piece of Gorgonzola. I mean, with those 4 widely available cheeses, you've got 4 different countries represented. You've got cow's milk and sheep's milk. You've got mild flavors and strong flavors, hard textures, crumbly textures. You've got things that go great with savory pairings, like olives and nuts with the Gouda, sweet pairings like dried fruit and preserves with the blue. I mean, this is a fantastic cheese plate any way you put it. With it, just by using this little axiom or choosing 4 things that you'd be able to find anywhere. So I would hope to kind of alleviate anybody's trepidations about presenting a cheese board. You can always ask for recommendations. I mean, the best part of my job is talking to people about cheese and what they like and what might be good together, and what their aunt might think is great at a Christmas party. Like, absolutely. I've been doing this for a long time, and it's still fun to think about that taste, those combinations and those pairings and what that's going to be like. So by all means, don't be afraid to ask, don't be afraid to try new things, and don't be afraid to just pick 3 things at random and put it out. You're doing the right thing just by attempting it. So keep at it. Yeah, so beyond that, like I said, I work at the Whole Foods in Brookside area, kind of just south of the plaza, right by UMKC. I'm there most mornings during the week, always available for questions or recommendations. There's my email, there's my phone number. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions? You can put them in chat room, or you can unmute yourself.
Somebody did ask about any Whole Foods that we can ask for cheese paper. Definitely at my location, we have a lot of it. The other Whole Foods in the area, the Olathe store and the Overland Park store, they likely have some of it, but I'm not sure whether or not they have it readily available. They got it. I know they got it, but
So if there's another question which I was going to ask, thank you, Mike. What is your favorite cheese? And
yeah,
Mike is saying his is Parmigiano Reggiano.
Sure. And Mike, let me say you have great taste. My favorite cheese is also Parmigiano Reggiano. I just cut a wheel today, actually, and it's my favorite day of the week to break open a big fresh wheel and sample right out of the center fresh. It's an amazing cheese. In terms of branching out from there, there's a cheese called Piave. That is another kind of hard Grana Italian cheese with similar kind of nutty, salty characteristic. It's not quite as acidic as Parmigiano Reggiano. It has a little more of almost like a fruity characteristic to it. That one is great and really not as well appreciated. Aged Gouda would be another thing that I'd recommend. Something kind of in the 18-month, starting with the 18-month range, will give you a lot of similar characteristics that kind of go in a different direction from there. So you'll get salty, you'll get nutty, but you start to develop kind of a caramely quality that Parmigiano Reggiano doesn't. Piave is spelled here. I'll put it right in here. Piave.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And what were the cheeses we were discussing at the beginning before everybody started? There was this Jasper Hill is a farm in Vermont, and you carry them. They have amazing cheeses.
Yeah, Jasper Hill is a fantastic story, really. They're in Greensboro, Vermont. And so there's kind of a European tradition of something called affinage, which translates to like cheese aging. So this is where someone will make the cheese and then hand it off to an affineur to kind of keep it fresh, or let it ripen under the right conditions. To keep cheese for 10 years like that Tillamook, you can't just like lock it in the back of a closet and forget about it. You have to rotate it, you have to keep the temperature right and the moisture and the humidity right. So that's this idea of affinage. And Jasper Hill is an affineur. So they do make some of their own cheeses from their own herd, but then they do aging for other people too. So they produce, oh gosh, at this point, 20, somewhere in the neighborhood of that, different cheeses. All of them are exceptional and unique. They just, at the last American Cheese Society conference in July, their cheese, which is a new cheese, it's called Whitney, it won Best in Show. And it's a melting type cheese, sort of modeled after like raclette or some of the Alpine style cheeses. And it's wonderful. It's fantastic cheese. So anytime you see Jasper Hill, you can be guaranteed of an exceptional quality and a unique and wonderful cheese made in Vermont.
And I also mentioned the Legio. If you can,
yeah.
if you can type it in the, I don't know if there is double G or not. Oh yeah,
double G. Yeah. And that is a soft ripened, washed rind Italian cheese. So soft ripened like a brie, texture wise, it has that rind and it's kind of a soft spreadable texture. But through its aging process, they wash the outside of it in like a brine solution. And that allows it to age a little longer than a normal brie would, to really give unique complexity of flavor. Also, one of my favorite cheeses, really, I mean, it's a great spreadable texture, has a real kind of meaty flavor to it. It's great paired with savory things like olives and meats and nuts and things like that. It's great on a sandwich, quite frankly. It's just forget mustard, put some Taleggio on it, you know. So yeah, Taleggio.
And I put in a chat room. Yeah, I put it. Thank you, Janet. No worries.
Thank you. Yeah.
So a book, it's called Milk. It's a nonfiction book by Mark Kurlansky. He writes this salt and chicken and all this other cod, I think is another of his book. And this is Nick, I thought you may enjoy it, like different types of cows, how the milk differ, and actually which cow milks the most milk. It's the most petite cow, which lives someplace in Jordan or something. It's a really fascinating book on milk, and they said how milk contains all these properties and enzymes which haven't been really researched yet.
Yeah, it's true. There's a facility at the University of Wisconsin in Madison called the Center for Dairy Research. And they're recognized worldwide for this type of research specifically. They just look at milk and cheese making and how to make cheese better and better for you and more efficient, and looking at some of those unique properties of milk and being able to isolate them and study them. It's really amazing when you think about it. The simple glass of milk you enjoy is really a complex and wonderful thing.
And I also wanted to mention, we were discussing before the program how Whole Foods has 12 days of Christmas cheese discount. So you get to, this year you can buy them all on the one day, not just every day running to Whole Foods to buy cheese.
Yeah.
So can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, so starting on December 13th or 12th, December 12th, there's 12 cheeses that were selected by Whole Foods for their unique qualities and properties, both in terms of flavor and kind of this backstory of them. And they'll all be on very deep discount, 35+% off and more if you're a Prime member. And yeah, it's a really great opportunity to try new things, to try things we only get once a year, and really branch out from what is out there that you might normally get and what isn't often on sale. So it's a great program. It's something we have a lot of fun with. We've been talking about it at Whole Foods for since April, I think. So the anticipation is building on our end for sure. I would definitely put it out there on yours if you can get here in the 2 weeks before Christmas, which I understand is a little bit crazy. You will be rewarded with some great deals on cheese that is really exceptional.
Well, Christmas is all about food, so it may
Sure.
as well be cheese, you know.
Yeah, amen. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Nick. This was great. You are very knowledgeable, and we are happy to have you. And we will see you again for hands-on cheese making class on the 11th, next Friday. And then in the spring, we have more classes with Nick coming up on olives, olive oil, chocolate, and more stuff we can come up with. Thank you,
Yep.
everyone, for joining us.